Welcome, Christina.
Thank you.
And I've been looking very much forward to pick your brain on everything IT M&A. Can you start giving an introduction to who you are and how you ended up doing IT M&A?
As you already said, my name is Christina, and I'm here today to explain a bit about what I experienced in a company during a hyper-growth period where they also decided to grow through inorganically. So we were a team that was exposed to a lot of different deals, a lot of different deal types across the value chain in a very short time. So I was the leader of that team, building up the capabilities, and was responsible for understanding what is it that we need to deliver to a line of business and by when.
Okay.
So that's why I'm here. I assume.
Yeah. But how did you end up doing IT M&A? Because I think you had a different background, right? You started out in finance.
Yeah. Well, how did I end up in that? I mean, I guess I have an audit education in auditing actually, and started in finance, and then I moved into something more managing projects because I think it was a lot nicer to look forward instead of looking backwards, and also making changes and improving things. And then I went a bit into more strategic areas, digitization, and then I decided actually to go directly into IT because I could see that there was an opportunity for someone who could sort of bridge both IT and business. And then I ended up having a project where I had to manage an acquisition in a Danish company where they were entering the US market and had to trade on the US market. And it was actually, it combined all the things that I had already done earlier.
Okay.
So you could say that's sort of the background.
Yeah. And then lately you've been working in Novo Nordisk with all the different acquisitions.
Yes.
What did you do there? What was that all about? So you said you kind of manage a long portfolio of different acquisitions, but how did that actually work?
So how did it work? I mean, we were... Yeah, it's a difficult question. It was decided strategically, of course, not by IT, but at a very high level that the company wanted to grow also through acquisitions, both to improve the pipeline, but also to increase capacity in terms of manufacturing. And then a huge part of that is IT, because there is a lot of dependency on data and a lot of dependency on IT systems. Today, in this digital world where you cannot lift your little finger without including IT, of course, it had a big impact. So I was tasked with figuring out how do we handle that? How should the operating model look like? What capabilities do we need to have in IT, and what roles, and how many people, and so forth, whilst also delivering on all these projects that came in. And had to understand, so what does it mean to acquire an asset as opposed to a full company, and do a carve-out of a manufacturing site and so forth. So we had to establish processes and playbooks, hire people, everything at once.
All right. Can you try to take me through the full process or the life cycle of an acquisition? So from the early stages of sourcing to due diligence, and finally kind of the post-merger integration, and then of course that it lives on in the new way of working. Yeah. Can you try to take me through that process and the different steps?
So the whole deal life cycle as such, you would start with scouting, which would of course depend on where you want to grow. I mean, if we're speaking about a manufacturing capability or a manufacturing site, then you would, have of course an issue or a gap, and then they would source that or look into that in the sourcing process, and then when there was specific a target was found, IT would be involved. And then we were typically part of the due diligence, where we would do sort of... and then when the due diligence, which is typically a very short period, like 3 to 5 weeks typically, after that, then we would prepare in the sign to close period, day one. And then day one is when the company is formally owned and you take over the keys, and then we would prepare for the long-term integration. And what would be very important from an IT perspective is to understand what is the rationale. Why is it that they are acquiring this particular asset or company? What is it that they are trying to achieve with it, and how do we support that best possible? So just to give an example of an asset. As an example, it could be that it's very important for that particular part of the business to get access to a certain number of data or a certain set of data by day one. And then that would, of course, be our priority. But every case is different. So there could be, and which is why you need to be a bit curious about the rationale and understand that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I think one thing that I noticed that you said that that often you are part of the due diligence from an IT perspective. So it also happens that you are not. And I think from the dialogues that I often have is that IT is sometimes forgotten in the early stages of acquisitions, right?
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? And what is the impact of not involving IT early on in the process?
I think it's pretty natural with the people and the mindsets of the people who are deal makers that's their focus. That's what they're being measured on. They are there to deliver on a specific acquisition, on a specific deal, and go to signing and then day one. Whilst a lot of the things that is happening in IT is very operational, so it's happening further down, you could say, in the deal life cycle, long after signing and day one. That's where all the heavy IT activities lie. So I think it's pretty natural that if you have that focus, then you might not consider IT early on. But and the impact of that, to take if you take the financial angle, if you look at the business case, if you don't validate the assumptions with IT, then there might be a huge gap because it will likely be taking a lot longer or be a lot more expensive than anticipated to bring in IT. Which is why it makes a lot of sense to bring them in earlier on and to validate the business case also with IT. Of course, bearing in mind it's a commercial process, so it's a balance. You have to balance that because, of course, it needs to be a commercial decision, but you also need to provide your input and your risks, in a good way, so that can be taken objectively and be part of the decision process.
Okay, so for the due diligence step, it's very important to kind of course, understand the business case of this.
Yeah.
What other items are you kind of going through to check when you do the IT part of the due diligence?
So we had a huge list of questions, and ideally we would, probably more than 100 questions, and ideally we would go through all of those. But in those particular cases, either there was a certain speed to it, or it was a smaller company, so they might not have that maturity, and maybe it could be a startup where there was only one IT person, and then we came with an army of people with all our questions. So we also had to balance that. So we had a prioritized list of minimum questions that we always needed to get answered, and that was very much related to the security posture, because in a context of M&A, there is an increased activity in terms of cyber attacks when a company goes out and announces, now we are acquiring this and that, and therefore it was one of our big focus areas. But also, if you acquire data, something IP rights that you want to put into your pipeline, you need to make sure that it's actually secure, that it's not data hasn't been just floating around all kinds of places, that it's protected. So that was some of the key things that we looked at.
Yeah, so you also, when you do an acquisition, you also acquire the risk of that company.
Yes.
And that also goes into the judgment of...
Yes, certainly. And also, and then you could say if it was like a manufacturing or a company with manufacturing or something really, then you also need to understand the IT landscape. What are the risks? Do they have a different ERP solution? Okay, what would it cost actually to bring it into ours? That, and how long would that take? And bring that information onwards, because that would also, of course, have a big impact on the business case before deciding on go or no go.
Did you go to the manufacturing sites as well to check it out, or was it more a desktop research part of the process? Or
so I didn't personally,
but the team.
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. Yeah, they a lot. There was actually lots of people involved because in a site, one of the sites we had that was acquired needed around 175 IT applications to support the business processes. So and that was to get it into the Novo Nordisk stack. So it was a lot of IT systems that needed to be implemented, but of course they had their own.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of different people involved, both like from infrastructure, from production side, from security and so forth, that went on and looked at it and prepared it. But that was probably a little bit later in the process, maybe in the sign to close period. So after the deal was done. And then we did the more thorough sort of planning and investigation. Yeah. But the team went lots of different places.
Yeah. Actually, seeing it in real life also makes a big difference, right? So, of course, just getting data from a data room is nice, but probably not sufficient in a setup like that, right?
Yeah. And then we were heavily involved in the whole onboarding.
Yeah.
Setting up that, preparing the people for day one to getting new end user devices, getting access to application and all that. So, and that was typically also driven by our team, that we were preparing, welcoming all the new people to the company.
Yeah. Okay. So if we look at the deal lifecycle again, right?
Yes.
We had kind of the sourcing. We had some pre-due diligence, some due diligence, and then we kind of move on to some signing and deal closure, and then at some point IT is then involved again, right? Or how does it work? Because I guess in the Novo Nordisk context, you were very much or often involved in the due diligence. Then there might be a little bit of a pause where IT is not that involved in closing and negotiating and all of that. And then at some point when the deal is closed, then a lot of stuff happens for IT, right? Then you need to prepare.
Actually, from due diligence we were sort of involved. We were told now this is coming.
Okay.
Then we were actually heavily involved.
Okay.
And some of especially for the manufacturing parts, 30% of all the preparations leading up to day one actually came out of IT. So we were orchestrating lots of different things. So it was actually the most heavy work stream that was preparing for the closure, you could say.
Yeah.
And then, of course, after that, the really big project started, because that's when you have to implement all these different kinds of system or handle all the existing systems. And depending also on what the line of business was. There was several cases. Now it becomes a little pharma specific, but there was also cases where they, of course, wanted to they do a lot of improvements at the particular site. So they acquired it as it was, and then they had a lot of plans to improve. So that was what we had to understand. So, and follow those deadlines and do our best to sort of meet the line of business ambitions and deadlines. But there could also be cases where it was bringing in a production site with a new type of technology, because they wanted to produce a new type of technology. And then that whole business process had to be laid out first before we could find out, okay, so how do we support that from an IT standpoint?
Okay. That makes sense. So you actually, before you had a deal signed, you already started preparing as if the deal would be signed.
Yeah.
Was that because Novo Nordisk's strategy was just, as soon as kind of the due diligence was through and we kind of knew it was something that Novo Nordisk wanted to acquire, then the rest was more or less just formalities? Or because I guess usually you would probably wait until you have agreed and negotiated and signed a deal before starting preparing the actual integration.
I think it was because it just went really fast.
It went really fast. Okay.
There were some of the cases. There was a case where the sign to close was only 30 days, and we had to, from IT, put up some infrastructure to have that ready, and so it was really fast.
Happening very rapidly.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in that whole process of kind of due diligence and preparing for the actual integration, what were kind of your most important learnings and things that you saw in the early phases that then had a huge impact later on?
Well, I think it was, especially in the critical questions that we asked in due diligence, I think we got pretty good at making assumptions, because of course there was a lot of things that we didn't know. So we got pretty good at understanding or creating the assumptions in terms of how do we handle this later on, and also I think just, the more exposed you are to different kinds of problems, although it's the same, it's sort of the same life cycle you go through, but it's different problems. The more exposed you are to different problems, the better you just get. It's like you improve your muscle, you could say. But if you want something, you would like something very concrete, I think one of the key things was how big an impact, as an example, data had.
Yeah.
I think that was... Initially, there was not that much focus on data, but it ended up being a huge thing, actually, and a whole work stream by itself. And we also agreed with all the different parties in the organization. We were sitting like these, you could say, spiders in the web, going across the company, the value chain, and then also inside IT. So we were orchestrating all these details, and we ended up agreeing with everybody that we would sort of do the master plan for data. We would own that, and then of course we could not own data because we would not be sort of familiar with the data and shouldn't own that or shouldn't have that understanding either. But we would create the master plan and identify what data was, what kind of sources it was, in what kind of system where it needed to go, and then ensure that plan was executed. And that was a pretty big task and took a lot of discussions with different parts of the organization.
What impact could it have that data was not considered sufficiently in the beginning? What would kind of be the issue later on?
It could actually be that if you are in a pharma context and you go through different phases, clinical trials, and if you reach to a stage where you want to have your product approved by the authorities, if you cannot document data, then what do you do?
Yeah.
So we were quite involved in that, and we also improved the process by establishing some technology where you could actually trace data and you could see who had taken what. So we would reduce like redundancies, but also you could document things later on.
Yeah. Okay.
So it could have a big impact actually
on the
full
commercial impact as well, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Because if you could not document data, then I mean, the risk would be that you wouldn't get the product approved.
Okay. Yeah. I think what I've seen is also that we talked about it a little bit earlier as well, like the involvement of IT early on.
Yes.
How would you suggest that IT gets on the agenda early on? Like what's the tips and tricks from your end to actually ensure that it's brought in early so that we avoid those mistakes later on?
I think it should just be considered as a core work stream, like P&O, legal, finance, and IT, because it is like such an embedded part of how a business runs today. You could do very little without technology and IT. So it should just be a natural part of the whole process early on. I think that would make a lot of sense. Yeah. And it's very much considered as an operational part, which it is also because there is a lot of work done operationally later on in the process, in the PMI process. But it should also be considered as an enabler or a value, something that is creating value. If you, for example, consider the whole thing about cyber, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
If you acquire something and you're not sure it's protected, then that's the whole value of that particular deal. So it's a mindset, and I'm sure it will change over time. I think it's pretty natural that in many companies that IT is considered as a service function, right? But it's changing.
It's changing and being more integrated in the key decisions from the top level as well.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
That kind of goes from the early stages to somewhat in the middle, where we kind of end up with having acquired the company and everything is planned, and then the actual integration happens.
Yeah.
How did you approach that in Novo?
The actual integration?
Yeah, so the PMI part.
Again, that was you would need to understand what is the rationale with that particular acquisition, and is it an asset or is it a full company? And then you need to follow that and follow those deadlines. It could be if it's an asset, as mentioned, if they need data at a certain time, then you would need to support that process and ensure that that's ready by when line of business needs it. If it's a full company, then you will also need to follow there are always very sort of strict sort of deadlines in terms of what needs to happen by when, where you of course need to do your best to deliver on the IT side. Again, you also asked about if we're not involved in due diligence and we're not considered early, then we can have a big impact on some of those deadlines, because IT typically takes longer than expected to acquire hardware or to order stuff. Or it can be many things. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah.
What about you mentioned that data, for example, was a very important work stream.
Yeah.
What other work streams would you have in an integration?
So the standard ones we had was infrastructure, would be one. Then we had the application layer, cybersecurity as one, data management, and then organizational change management. And then there would be an integration lead who was sort of orchestrating everything within IT and towards line of business. Typically, they set up something called an IMO from a corporate side, the integration management office.
All right, yeah.
Where they typically only want one person. So you need one from IT who sort of represents IT. So that could be an integration person from my team, as an example, leading that. And then making sure that all the different sub-work streams in IT would then be orchestrated. But that would be the typical ones. But of course, it also depends on how you're organized as an IT organization. Where do you have your hardware? Who does that? And what do you do with service desk, as an example? Or you also need to align a little bit to how you are organized internally in IT. But it would typically be those work streams, where the application work stream could be very heavy. Also having ERP as a separate item.
Yeah.
And as mentioned, now there was one where we would have to implement 175 IT system, but you could also be in a case where you acquire a full company where they have a lot of applications already, and then you need to go through each of them and find out what is the rationale here. Do we need to keep it, or can we use something we have already? And if so, how do we do that? And everything has to be documented, saved, closed, transferred, and so forth.
So you actually, for every acquisition you did, you went through the application portfolio to see, okay, what's the overlap and what can we disregard or close down?
Yes. Okay. Yes, we did that. And of course, the more your own house is in order, the easier it is.
Yes.
Right? So it's also, and if you have a lot of applications in the company that is acquiring, then you also need to understand, okay, where do we go with this application and so forth. Yeah. But we did that.
Because I've seen other companies where they are not doing that.
Okay.
So I worked with, not mentioning any names, but I worked with a company that had more than 40 different ERP systems.
Okay.
Because they have also grown inorganically, right? And they then tried to later on consolidate all the ERPs on one. Yeah. And that's just a hard hassle, right? So it's a challenge.
Yeah.
And then I saw another company where they actually, what they did was they consolidated on ERP.
Okay.
But the rest of the application portfolio, they left behind.
Okay.
So they just had a long tail of tons of applications.
Yeah.
So that also, of course, required later on a huge rationalization exercise.
Of course.
So it's really cool that you are actually, or what you did was actually do it in the midst of things, like when it was most urgently needed as well, right?
And now it sounds like we succeeded with everything and exited and all that. I mean, we were sort of touring around in the organization with this picture showing a mountain, because of course you acquire something here and then something happens, and then later on all the work needs to be done in IT, depending on the what you're acquiring. If it's very pharma specific, if you're acquiring something that is doing a clinical trial, then maybe you need to wait at a certain point until they're done with that before you can actually do the full data transfer and close down all the applications. So it's maybe something you're pushing in front of you. So we were actually building up a backlog of activities. The same if you're acquiring a production site that is producing already, maybe for yourself, or it could also be for third party, then you also need to ensure that production that you can sort of, business continuity will then business continuity is the most important at day one, that they can keep producing until you're ready to switch to your own system. And then that has to be planned. That's very detailed, how you do that. And again, that can also be a backlog, because then you might wait until, a contract expires a couple of years from now. It makes maybe sense to continue producing for third party until that expires, and then you can do your integration by then.
Okay.
Yeah, so but for others, maybe it's less complicated. We also had some production where there wasn't doing any production, where it was sort of empty. And then you could, of course, start implementing IT systems already.
Yeah, so
Does that make sense?
Yeah, but there's some timing in it, right?
Yeah.
So there are, of course, already some things happening in the company that you're acquiring and also in the company that you are in that can hinder when you can do things.
Yeah.
And I think a good example, I recently spoke with a CIO where they are also doing a PMI.
Yeah.
And they are they are also doing an ERP transformation at the same time.
Yeah. Okay.
So the thing that they have to integrate to is, of course, a moving picture.
Yes.
How would just as a thought experiment, how would you address that part? Like if you are integrating into a company where they're already doing an ERP transformation?
So that was the case that Novo was doing the SAP for HANA transformation. So we had to sort of, there was some cases where there was sort of temporary solution that had to be built until they were ready with the SAP for HANA, because everything was sort of put on hold. Yeah. Because that was, of course, priority number one, was that they needed to do that transfer. So we had to sort of build sort of small solutions, or do like just manual uploads of some sheets and into, so you could consolidate your books and so forth. Yeah,
gaffer tape solutions.
Exactly.
But I think that's needed.
What I thought that was most important for our role was actually that we had the picture, that we knew, and we had that backlog, and we knew exactly what was waiting for us, and we could communicate that.
Yeah.
Because the risk is if you don't have like a mindset of a portfolio mindset where you keep track of things, then you into the situation that you just described, right? With all these different ERP systems or applications floating around in that different sort of environment. How do you control that? But I think what we did really good was that we had this portfolio mindset. So we had a complete overview of everything we brought in and what the plan was, you could say.
And
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. It makes a lot of sense. I'm just curious whether you can kind of talk a bit more about how you approach that. I know it's probably a little bit of a unique situation because there's not a lot of companies in a similar situation as Novo acquiring, 20, 30 companies at the same time. But there might be some companies acquiring a few at the same time, right? And there might still be backlogs.
Yeah.
How would you manage and keep that structure? Was it just a long Excel sheet with names on, or did you have another approach to do it?
So there is technology that you can use where you document. Right now we have acquired this, and they have these 50 applications, and then you document that. We didn't get to that stage of maturity. That would probably recommend it if you are a serial acquirer to do it like that. So we just had our portfolio overview sort of in, maybe it was not in Excel, but in Power BI or something like that, where we just kept control of the different acquisitions. And there was a number of people in the team. So of course, the person A had responsibility for these 3 projects and had that overview. And then we had a consolidated overview together as a team. But we actually had an overview of everything across the full value chain because we were involved in all the different processes, both from research and then to manufacturing.
Cool. I think it seems like you're a bit humble because you're also saying, of course, not everything was in order, right? But it sounds like you had quite a lot of structure still, and it was probably also required in order to just keep track of everything at the same time.
Yeah.
Can you walk me through a bit about kind of whether you had like frameworks or playbooks, or what were kind of the tools that you used to support you in this?
Yeah. So we started out by having a playbook that documented sort of the first acquisitions, what were the learnings by then. And then we, of course, improved that over time. But there was actually quite a lot of sort of discussion because people are different. Some think something is important and what is standard. And then when you are in such a big organization, you're also very dependent on they having particular standards and so forth. So in the end, we actually ended up having a process map just showing what we discussed earlier, the deal life cycle, so from scouting to exit. And then under each part of that, under each phase in the deal life cycle, we just had these key IT activities described. And then you could click, and then there would be different types of template documents underneath. So we sort of avoided the discussion about the detail level, because you could be fairly detailed if it's underneath, right? And then we had this just one simple overview. And when you're dealing with something that is sort of immensely complex and complicated, all these details in an enterprise, into an enterprise, really nice. You can boil it down to like a one page and say, this is what we need to go through, and then take it step by step. So that's how we ended up. And I think it depends on how you are, but I'm just not so good at 200-300 pages of PowerPoint. I think it's much nicer to have this, simple way of looking at things, and then tuk.
And then you can drill down if needed. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that was one of my really brilliant colleagues who came up with the idea of doing that process. And then we distinguished between whether or not it was like a manufacturing or if it was sort of, we called it a corporate asset. And then we had those two. And then, there was, of course, a lot of details underneath.
Okay. And then so that was, so you could click in and find the template needed for the different phases in the acquisition.
Yeah. So you could say, for example, a due diligence. Then you could go in and find your questions, what you need to ask. We had then the standard list of questions, the big part and the big list, and then the prioritized list. And that's just one example. Also, we discussed the applications earlier. Then you could also go in and find a template for that. Okay, what questions is it that I need to have answered? Who do I need to reach out to? And at what point in time? Is there sort of a particular risk because the people in the acquired company are leaving and so forth? Yeah.
Okay.
And then, of course, budget. Budget is also a fairly big part of it.
Yeah.
The IT budget is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In what way?
Yeah. In the sense of you having to implement so many different systems, and you're dependent on a lot of colleagues or externals to provide that at specific times.
Okay. Yeah. So there's a lot of synergies that you can also harvest by looking at the budgets, right?
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Definitely.
How did you get to that point as well in Novo of actually measuring and tracking the synergies from?
No, not as such.
No.
No, on a company level, the benefits. Yeah, I'm sure that will come.
But I think probably also the case of Novo has probably changed now today, right, compared to a few years back.
Yes.
But it was probably not with the synergies of cutting IT costs for the different acquisitions, right? It was probably more getting that business capability of extra capacity to production capacity, or a new market on the product, or a new product on the market, or whatever it was, right? New technologies.
Exactly. Yeah. So improving the pipeline by getting those assets in, or increasing capacity. Yeah. That was definitely
Earlier we talked a little bit about the work stream, so we got to application, and then we kind of deviated it a little bit, but that's fine. So we had the application where you of course do the mapping of the different applications and try to only use the ones that actually make sense.
Yes.
Then on the infrastructure, what are the things that you looked for there, and what did you do there? Was that more on like moving over, migrating workloads and getting things in cloud, or what was kind of the purpose there?
As far as I remember, there was a pretty sort of strict sort of rule that everything had to go into the Novo Nordisk infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like that was sort of it. If you do manufacturing, there is a specific one that you also need to cover. So there was it was like a no-go. That was the plan. But of course, then, I mean, it was maybe a little bit difficult always to follow the line of business, very tough deadlines and so forth. But I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. It's similar to with the applications, right? You don't want to run dual environments.
Yeah, exactly.
So kind of keeping it simple and neat is of course the goal.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we had the security work stream.
Yeah.
So that similar situation, I guess, you kind of ensure that everything is in place, or was there anything else that you were particularly focused on?
I think in the due diligence, of course, we were very focused on. I mean, we had this. We did, various things, but we were very, very focused on how the security posture was of the target that we wanted to acquire, and how do we protect that by announcement. Was there anything that we need to put in place to protect the asset before it came out? And then typically our security experts also identified areas that needed to be improved by certain times, and then we of course needed to ensure that. And it could be. Let me think if I can come up with some specific examples, but. No, not. It will come.
Maybe come later.
Maybe later.
One thing that you also mentioned earlier was some of these very important milestones. So when you kind of go from the preparing, then there are reality hits pretty fast suddenly when day one happens. Yeah. And employees that used to have one access card suddenly has another access card and shows up at maybe at the same location, but with a new sign on the wall. What's kind of the most important part of that day one and succeeding with that?
In terms of employees, or
I would say
I
think employee-wise, I think that's probably where you really feel it, right? The first day, because that's where they need a new PC and all the other stuff. But how do you prepare and make that transition as smooth as possible? Yeah.
So what our sort of ambition or the goal was, the ultimate goal for day one was to ensure business continuity. And especially with some of these factories, as mentioned, who were doing production, we needed to make sure that by day one, they could continue doing that. Yeah. And of course, that required a lot of detailed preparation. But then, of course, that you can get access to your laptop, that you have your laptop, and that there is connectivity and all those kind of things. But I'm actually, when I was preparing a little bit for this, I was trying to think about, okay, was there like one of these crazy cases where it went really wrong? And we actually did really well.
Okay.
We have been in IT and done lots of IT projects. There's so many things that could go wrong with IT, right?
Definitely.
But and I was thinking, okay, is that something from my little black book? But I couldn't come up with something completely crazy. No. So somehow we managed.
But that also maybe goes back to that you most likely had a lot of attention on that, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Of course.
You called one of the work streams people and change management, I think.
Yes.
And I guess that's probably the one where a lot of those things, of course, end user devices might go a little bit on under infrastructure as well and things like that. Yeah. But the change management needed beforehand and after.
Yes.
What were some of the activities that you did there?
Yeah. So actually, there was, of course, an organizational change management from the IMO, from a central place, and then we had our own in IT, which got a little bit of pushback initially, but we were in IT some of the first people that they meet. I mean, if you acquire someone, the first one that ensured you get sort of your end user device is coming from IT. So it was pretty important that it was a key role in the IT track to ensure that, both to understand what does it look like by day one, to be able to communicate and be part of the communication track, but also understanding the change impact of someone. You could say if you're a small company and being brought into a very, very big company, then it's a massive change, and you need to acknowledge that and make sure that they feel welcome, because that's a key part of the whole sort of integration. And one of the things that typically does go wrong is this cultural mismatch. So the more you can do from the IT side, as an example, to make people feel welcome and prepare a good onboarding, is also helping the whole process further down the line. Yeah. So it was a key role in the IT and the IT track. And then, of course, it depends on the person. Some are, but we had a fantastic change manager in the team that did a really good job. Yeah.
So they ensured that everything ran smoothly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And you could say we had a day one where it was 3 manufacturing sites at the same time at different locations geographically in the 3 different locations in the world, where it was very, very sort of detailed planned what need to happen from the IT side, and everything was set up. You could go and get support from IT service desk and so forth. Yeah. So.
Oh, that's interesting. So can you take us through how that actually went? Like so day one at the manufacturing site. So everything was just prepared. You traveled there with laptops, set things up, and how did it work?
I mean, some traveled there, and then of course laptops were provided, and then it was thoroughly sort of defined who need their own laptops, who just need to get access to a central one. Then there was sort of classroom training where people got their laptops, and you could see that everybody. I mean, we made sure that everybody could get access, could open it, and the same with the phone and so forth. So all that was
executed
and planned. It was a very it was a big task, and then
could imagine. And then at some point the integration is done. And IT is kind of phasing out, and everything goes back to operations. Then you mentioned something about exit as well. Did Novo sell things as well, or divest?
No, not to my knowledge. A little bit, but so not something we were part of. Okay. But it's of course very much part of how big pharma operate. They also divest a lot, and that also So, but they
didn't get to that.
No, let's see.
Maybe that changes.
We will see.
Do you think that Novo will continue the acquisition strategy, or how are things?
It's difficult to speculate on that, right? I think in terms of capacity, it seems like they got what they needed, but I don't know. It's difficult to say. Depends on what strategy they will sort of go for. If they want to continue sort of growing through acquisitions, or not, depending.
I think you mentioned these. I think you had 3 different acquisition types, right? So you had something that were enterprise, something that was more capacity production sites, and what was the last one?
So we had different deal types. So we also had like in-licensing, which is also part of the M&A, where you would then sort of borrow, you could say.
Okay.
So you get access to it, and then for a price, where our role was very much sort of ensuring that. Again, a little bit in terms of security, we needed to ensure that data was protected, and then we also provided data to our colleagues who needed that. And then you would have a deal type, which is an asset, and that can be sort of where you acquire IP rights, you carve that out, provide data. You could do a full company acquisition, and then you can, of course, do a carve-out of a manufacturing site as well, which they also did. But you could also acquire a larger company that also has manufacturing sites. But here we were only part of carving out manufacturing sites, which is fairly complicated from an IT standpoint, because you have to carve it out of the existing IT landscape infrastructure, make sure that they can continue producing, and then make a plan for how do you get them onto your own. And here the strategy was very clear that everything production needs to be on Novo's own infrastructure and application landscape. That was not the discussion, but of course that takes a while.
So it's more complicated to carve a part of a business out than acquiring the whole business, because if you just acquired the whole business, they could still operate with the setup that they had. But carving out, they were more or less without IT or technology support until they were on Novo platform.
But then you would do you make agreements. I think called TSAs. You make agreements with the seller, and then of course that's very costly as well, and that also needs to be managed. And that if you have several hundred applications, then it's a lot of work. And of course something that you need to acknowledge that takes time and requires resources and cost to handle that.
So that's probably one of the other very important milestones later on. So we have the kind of the day one. Then there might be this TSA
exit
for a period.
Yeah.
And then at some point you have a deadline saying, okay, now we need to be migrated to the Novo Nordisk platform.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as mentioned, this communication tool we had where we shared all the backlog, and that was caused by that because the company acquired sites that was doing production for third party, and of course then you knew that things would happen later on. You're just sort of pushing that out in the future until you're ready to do it, depending on the different characteristics of that acquisition.
Yeah. Cool. What it seems like you've learned a lot in a very short amount of time. Because you said like you've not done this for
30 years.
30 years. It's like, how many years did you do it at Novo? Was it 3-4 years or something like that?
Yeah.
But kind of had the experience of 30 years because you did so many.
Yeah.
What was kind of the most exciting part of this? What was the most fun?
Well, I mean, for me, I think it's the whole sort of. I mean, it's the complexity in enterprise, but also that you're so close to business decision and strategic decisions, and you need to sort of be good at sort of jumping up and down at different sort of abstract levels.
Yeah.
I couldn't say
levels
that word.
Of abstraction.
Exactly. Understanding what's the strategic, tactical, and then also operational, and then you were just exposed to so many, nerdy problems. You could say things that you could never have imagined, and I think that's And then just solving things, meeting deadlines. I think that's and then the speed of things, and then also I'm a curious person, right? So to learn new things is also quite it's interesting.
Yeah, there's of course different speeds in this as well, right? Because there's like the due diligence part where you said like 3 to 5 weeks, and you need to have assessed and done the due diligence of the company, right?
Yeah.
And then when you go into the PMI afterwards, that can then take years, right? So it's, but of course there are still important milestones, but it's a complicated, cumbersome task to actually do that integration, right?
Yes, for sure.
So it has both speeds. That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have not. Everybody talks about AI as well.
Yeah.
Right. And that's of course there's probably 2 ways of considering AI in terms of IT M&A. There's of course AI that can support the actual process, but then there's also AI as part of the businesses that you buy, and things needs to go together in that regard as well.
Yeah.
How are you? What's your take on AI in terms of IT M&A?
So we didn't have any cases where we had to assess any sort of in any of the companies that we acquired where we needed to assess. I mean, what kind of AI models do they have? And we were not in that situation, but that will come because traditional companies also will have AI. So that's for sure something that is coming and something that needs to happen. But then. As mentioned, we had this portfolio overview of all different kinds of applications, and we knew what data needed to be transferred by when. If you don't have that structure, if you don't have that in place, if you don't have the overview and just things are just floating, I think it would be difficult to scale AI. At least that would be my take on that. And then, of course, you mentioned the process. One of the things we looked into was how can we improve our process, do it smarter by using AI. And I'm sure that will also come, but it also requires some kind of agreement with the seller, because it's of course a very confidential process when you open up a data room and you give access to certain things. Do you want then a buyer to have some kind of AI agent going in and looking through your documents? Maybe not. Maybe at least it will take some time and require some sort of maturity before that. But there could definitely be a win there, because of course sometimes it could be thousands of documents that need to be sort of assessed. Maybe not from our side, but if you can do that by using some kind of agent, that would be, of course, take a lot of time in that process.
Yeah, but as you say, it can probably not be like a cloud-based version. It probably needs to be a locally hosted AI agent, right? Because the material is so confidential. I think that's probably a good perspective on that.
And maybe by some of the providers of data rooms, maybe there could be some kind of solution there to come. But and then, as mentioned, some of the things we were doing manually, going through an application, looking at I'm sure that there are things you can do a lot smarter there. By using some kind of technology instead of having a person looking through that and writing down all that you can definitely improve and optimize that process.
Now I'm probably asking a tough question because I don't even know the answer myself completely at all. But down the line, Novo will probably also, and other companies, they will acquire companies with the purpose of getting their AI capabilities.
Yeah.
So not buying it for the products necessarily, but maybe Novo will buy a company that's really good at doing simulation of how things are in the laboratory are happening, right? What would you think would be the key things to then go in and assess to actually make that happen? Data, of course, is one of them, but then what do you have any ideas to what would be things to look at?
I mean, I would. It would probably be a very close collaboration with some of the people who would then
know the subject matter
of it. Yeah, exactly. Some of the people who would sit in that lab and so forth, right? Because I think it would probably be difficult for us to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, without having the specific subject matter knowledge about that.
Yeah. It's an interesting one, right? Because it will probably be more and more occurring, right?
For sure. Yeah.
I did a podcast the other day with a guy from Kobble, and there we also talked about a company that bought again Kobble competitor, so engineering services. They just bought an AI company that is actually more or less replacing what they are doing.
Okay.
So it's just a AI agent that can do the same, right? And I'm just curious about that. I think that will just be a trend, right? So big companies might not be able to build those capabilities themselves, right? Or they are trying, but might not succeed.
No.
And sometimes the companies that are smaller and more nimble and have a bit more burning platform, they come up with something.
Yeah, for sure.
And they become targets going forward, right?
Yeah,
so
for sure.
So interesting to see how that
will play out.
That will play out. I'm curious to see that at least. And I think someone like Novo will probably go in that direction as well, right?
Because I could imagine. I could imagine.
If clinical trials or whatever it could be done smarter with AI.
Definitely.
And I know they are working on that, but it might be that someone else is actually succeeding with creating something.
Yeah, and also I just remembered that earlier we were speaking about data, right? Getting data in because they need it at a later stage. I mean, sometimes we experience that data can actually be 30 layers out. So it was very very cumbersome and complex process. And I'm sure that can also be improved by some kind of technology as AI, using that, getting access to that data in a smarter way.
And when you say layers, what do you then mean?
Because it was through an external, and then of a provider, and then it could be, in a different country, far away, in something,
So
where you need that particular paper access somehow documented.
Okay.
Which is difficult to imagine because that's a lot.
Yeah, but there's of course a lot of data handlers around the world and
exactly
in different companies and partnerships and things like that. So getting that mapping is probably quite difficult.
Yes.
For such a big company.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay. Cool. What would be your key recommendations to or key advice to someone starting on this acquisition process where they might be involved in due diligence, but also needs to go all the way through to the PMI? What would be your kind of three key points or three key takeaways to?
From a strategic angle or from an IT angle or
from an IT angle,
both.
From an IT perspective, because I think that's kind of the framing that we go with here. Right? So what for the CIO or the person that kind of gets the responsibility to do the due diligence and maybe also the PMI in IT, what should they be aware of?
I think, what should they be aware of? If I'm trying to combine all these details, I mean, it's a mindset, right? You need to have the right mindset. You need to sort of understand that it's an enterprise into an enterprise, so there is a lot of details to it, and you need to be curious and have be good at sort of planning and executing and understanding what the rationale is, and then deliver towards that. And then, as we already discussed, be sort of mindful or focused on these particular milestones that there are in that process, and what would be minimum viable products or deliverables from IT to those certain sort of milestones. Day one being one of the most critical ones, and then understanding what else is coming later on, and how do we support that best possible. And then ensure that you are objectively showing what you are, sort of presenting the risks, you could say, in a due diligence, so it can be part of the decision process. So of course, it will rarely be a deal breaker unless there's something very technology related that we haven't touched upon, but it would rarely be a deal breaker, but at least it needs to be taken into consideration that there could be risks to, say, for example, with cybersecurity, that the asset is not protected as such. Yeah. As long as you objectively show those risks, present those, and then plan and understand the different timelines that is in that process, because you can it would be unlikely that you can sort of impact those timelines, because there are different reasons for those timelines, and then you just need to ensure that you can deliver what you can to those timelines. As let's say day one, it has to be at a certain time because of certain, year end or whatever, and they need to consolidate books. You need to ensure that people get their salaries and so forth, and that's what you need to sort of deliver towards that ambition.
Cool.
I don't know if that sort of answers it.
No, it does.
And then, just try to explain that don't underestimate the IT part of this. It's a big role. As mentioned, 30% of all activities preparing for day one came out of IT. It's a lot. If you look at across the board, there can be 16, 17 work streams, so it's quite heavy. And then change management is critical. Yeah. It's critical to understand the people side of things and ensure that onboarding and the setup in systems and so forth is thoroughly prepared before day one.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? It's often a quite complex endeavor to do like an integration. And I think, as you also mentioned, it's really important to be involved in the beginning, or at least as early as possible, so you can spot the risks and get that perspective, so that you can objectively show this is what we are buying, and these are the consequences and opportunities or pros and cons that are with this acquisition.
Yes.
And then based on that, you can then also afterwards then do the planning in detail to actually get as good as possible day one, and then also meet the milestones afterwards.
Exactly.
But I think just the complexity in this kind of programs is requires a lot of preparation and planning. And structure.
Yeah, definitely. And then it's a transformation. Yeah. Like, because you bring in something new, you bring in people, processes, technology. Of course, it's a transformation. So you also need to be ready for that.
Yeah. And things will go wrong.
Yes, also.
So, like it happens, right? And that's just the nature of IT as well. Is just you can prepare for forever, but there will still be things that messes up once in a while, right?
Yes. And that's the fun about it. Yeah. You handle that.
Hopefully, it doesn't impact the business but maybe hopefully often is also just like kind of an IT challenge, an issue that's happening behind the scenes, and then hopefully it doesn't impact business too much. Yeah.
And then there's a lot of really smart people who can do this, who has it's a discipline. Yeah, it is. Right? It's not, if you do it once, yes, but it's a discipline, and you just get better and better.
And build a muscle to do it, right? Yeah. And have all the frameworks and playbooks in place, that helps.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that covers it. Thank you very much for joining the podcast. Very insightful.
thank you for inviting me, and thank you for very good questions as well, and also for taking up this little area.
I think it's great to deep dive on some topics, right? I think that's actually what I wanted to try with this one, is to take a specific topic and then go a bit deeper. And I think we could, of course, as we also talked about beforehand, we could have gone way deeper into the details and had some of the more technology perspective. But I think this one actually covers what's important to go over right now. So I think it was really good. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.